Germany is celebrating Reunification Day. It marks the day in 1990, less than a year after the Berlin Wall came down, when the communist East became part of West Germany and ceased to exist as a nation. So more than 30 years on, how unified is the country? Our reporters have been finding out.
Berlin on the 3rd of October 1990. The day when two Germanys, the communist East and the capitalist West, became one again. 33 years later, and it took until this July for East and West state pensions to achieve parity. People in the East still earn less than their Western counterparts, and there are far fewer East Germans in positions of power nationwide. Although German unity is complete, it is not perfect. In the minds and hearts of many, East and West Germany appear to be drifting apart once again.
Many of the East Germans, especially in smaller towns like the one where I live now, really feel forgotten. They feel invisible and that their problems are not addressed enough.
A recent survey found that less than 40% of Germans nationwide feel the country is more united than divided. Striking, the perception of unity is notably weaker in East Germany, with 75% feeling that division prevails. In 2019, Germans had a much more optimistic outlook. Back then, 51% nationwide said the country was more united. The pandemic, the consequences of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, rising energy costs, inflation. The country has had to battle with multiple crises. A majority of Eastern Germans say they are not very or not at all satisfied with the way democracy in Germany works. It is a sentiment that is being capitalized on by the populist far-right Alternative for Germany party. It has been garnering substantial support in Germany's eastern states ahead of three important regional elections in 2024. For Carsten Schneider, political measures alone will not solve the disparities. That has to come from society itself, both the interest in it as well as dealing with each other. I think that many Eastern Germans often feel a bit snubbed and that they're being treated with condescension, and there is no reason for that. While the physical process of Germany's unification has long been completed, it seems the mental divide between East and West is still proving to be a potent barrier.
That report from Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber, who joins us now. Benjamin, tell us more about this feeling, these reasons for disunity, not unity on this day.
That depends on who you ask. Of course, people in the East sometimes also feel like second-class citizens. There was even a survey now in September that was published. They asked people in both East and Western parts of Germany if it's justified that East Germans feel like second-class citizens. And 50%, so every second person in East Germany said that that's the case. But it's not just perception. We also have numbers, we also have graphics and the disparities that we just saw in the report when it comes to wealth, when it comes to the median net wealth that homes have. There are differences between East and West, also representation of how many people from East Germany are in high-level positions of companies, because after the reunification there were really requirements that people from East Germany could not fulfill. So there is a perception on one side, but there's still differences that are now still being treated. And you can see how people 33 years after this reunification still feel about it.
It's a long time. And I find it really interesting, 33 years on, that something like the pension system has only now just reached parity between former East and West.
That's right, that it took so long, that there's still some differences that need to be addressed. I think we need to look carefully, because there's still stereotypes on what Aussies, how people from East Germany, how Westies, how people from West Germany are. We cannot deny that the AfD, that the far-right AfD party, has a stronghold in Eastern states, but a majority of people there in the region in Eastern Germany vote for other parties, don't vote for the AfD. Of course, they also use it and say, you're not being listened to, we're the only party, we're the alternative, as the name says, of course, with the anti-migrant rhetoric that works pretty well also there. But we have to see that there are differences and that the AfD is also strong in the western part of the country. We have two major elections coming up now in Hesse and Bavaria, where they're also trying to gain more support. So there are differences there. And that's something that Carsten Schneider, the commissioner for Eastern Germany that we saw in the report, has been calling for. We need to talk more. We need to make this unification also complete in our heads. it's not just on paper, it was there already, and it was Carsten Schneider, but also Angela Merkel, former German Chancellor, who grew up there and said we need to talk more, we need this diversity
but
that we
not
have
only
in the
talk
country.
about it, but actually come up with solutions.
Come up with solutions and say how this can be changed and how we can get this feeling that they're not second-class citizens. I mean, if we look at the results of this survey, it's pretty scary that every second person feels that way. And also with other generations, some of them that were born after 1990, when Germany was unified already. So to have this feeling, to talk with them and to find some practical solutions also to work and to try to reduce, and of course, if it's possible, to reduce them completely, the disparities between East and West.
But are the other parties, the mainstream parties, coming up with other solutions, do you think? Do you get the feeling that they are?
They have to see how they can actually gain the support in that region where the AfD is so strong, in those little parts. But what we've also seen, also looking at surveys, also looking at reports, is that the disparity is not that much between East and West, but between urban areas and rural areas. And that's something that we see both in East Germany and both in West Germany, and that's something that politicians have to address.
Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber, thank you very much for your reporting and for coming in today. Pleasure.
Well, to give us more insight on this, we've invited historian and journalist Kcha Hoya to the programme. She's a visiting research fellow at King's College, London, and has authored a best-selling book about East Germany. It's good to have you on the programme, Kcha. Welcome. As we've just seen in our report, not everybody in Germany feels that the country is really unified as it marks 33 years of reunification. I'm interested to get your take on that.
Yeah, I think as your report clearly showed us, that many people don't feel represented. They don't feel like they get a say in what's going on. There's this sort of phrase that people use, you know, those up there are doing their own thing anyway, you know, regardless of what people, the small man and the small woman on the street basically says. And I think that feeling is more widespread in East Germany than in the former East, basically, than it is in the West.
The discrepancy in earnings, Kcha, is still one of the major areas of inequality. How is that manifesting in differences in life in East and West Germany?
Well, things are also a bit cheaper in terms of rent and things, but the discrepancy between wages is still greater. So therefore, basically, the money that you've got in your pocket to spend in East Germany is lower than in the West. But I think the bigger problem is that there's a feeling that discrepancy shouldn't exist anymore. So why should you get paid less for doing the same job in East Germany than you do in the former West? And I think that psychological or social sort of discrepancy that comes from that is more important actually than the monetary one. So people feel that they're being left behind, that this is kind of almost like a deliberate thing, even though, you know, these are kind of big economic and societal structures behind that, but people feel that is done, you know, to them, and there's nothing that they can do to remedy the situation.
We can see in recent election results, Kcha, that far-right ideology is being embraced in the East. People in the East feel that democracy just isn't delivering. Is this just down to the prevailing inequality, or is there more to that story?
Well, I would push back on the premise of that question a little bit. I mean, yes, the AfD is the largest political party at the moment in the polls in the East, but it isn't a majority party, so there's still the majority of East Germans that don't vote for the AfD at the moment, and also is on the rise in lots of Western states too. So there are bigger questions behind why that's happening, I think. But you're right, there is an East German dimension to that, in that the party is far more popular in the East. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that people feel dissatisfied with the state of democracy. That's not to say that they don't understand how democracy works. I mean, you can see that in the first election in 1990, when the vast majority of former East Germans voted for sort of mainstream, middle-of-the-road parties, hoping that unification would come about quickly and that it would be a success. And also in surveys about the satisfaction with democracy, you'll find higher figures in the 1990s than is the case now. So something has gone wrong basically over the last 33 years, as opposed to, you know, people just not understanding what democracy is because they grew up in a dictatorship.
Kcha, I want to point out to our viewers that you present a podcast called The New Germany. And I'm interested to know from you how you would describe the new Germany, and perhaps maybe how does it then compare to the old Germany?
Well, I think there is a chance at this point, and I say this in the book and the podcast actually, that there is now a new generation of people who haven't really grown up with the Cold War divides as part of their own upbringing, their own socialization. So maybe there is a chance now, for a bit more empathy both ways, for trying to break down some of these stereotypes that people have in their minds, some of these kinds of ideas of the other, if you will, of the Vessi and of the Aussie. Simply because people, now grow up with a unified Germany as a normal state, basically for the country to be in. So perhaps there is now a chance to move forward and build some sort of new Germany out of the two Germanys that there were, rather than just assuming that the East has to adapt to everything that the West did and that was the norm, and the East kind of differs from that. So perhaps there's a chance to sort of move forward together, as opposed to setting West Germany as the status quo and the East needs to adapt to it.
And Kcha, maybe I actually want you to expand further on that idea. I found it interesting that the one protagonist in the report said that German unity is complete, but it's not perfect. Where would you say Germany is getting it wrong in that regard?
A lot of the dialogue is still very one-dimensional. I mean, you also mentioned in the report how few East Germans are in, the media, politics, positions of power, basically, and positions of public dialogue. And I think that's part of the issue, is that perspective is just lacking. And when East Germans then do come out and say something or write something, quite often that is met with a lot of hostility and criticism. I mean, there was this sort of term of the Yammer Aussie, of the whining Aussie, around for a long time, which may have disappeared from public parlance, but is certainly still there in people's minds. So an East German voice in some of these things, I think, would help, going forward.
All right, that is the historian and journalist Kcha Hoya. As always, Kcha, good to be talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.